The days following Adrian's press conference were a storm, fast-moving, chaotic, and dangerous for anyone caught in its path. The hedge fund denials came quickly, but they were clumsy. Too many of their fingerprints were on the forged documents Adrian had revealed. Within 48 hours, the state attorney general's office announced an inquiry into their practices. By the end of the week, their stock had dropped 12%. Aurora's own shares, in contrast, climbed. The board, many of whom had been wary of Adrian's new direction, now publicly praised his leadership for defending corporate integrity. But the real victory wasn't in the market numbers. It was in the quiet moment 2 days later, when Elena walked into the art center for the first time since the smear campaign began and was met not with cameras, but with applause from the staff and students. She called Adrian that night. "It's over," she said. "At least this part." For the first time in months, the house on Albatross Lane felt normal again. The twins went back to school without reporters lurking nearby. They started planning a spring break trip, a modest beach vacation that, to them, felt like winning the lottery. But Adrian knew the Washington offer still lingered, unspoken but not forgotten. Hale hadn't called since the press conference, but the option was still there. And every so often, he'd catch Elena watching him with that half-question in her eyes. One evening, a week after the dust had settled, Adrian took Elena out to dinner. Not a public gala or a working meal, but a small Italian place tucked into a side street where no one knew them. Over pasta and wine, he finally said it. "I'm not taking the D.C. job." She set down her fork. "You're sure?" "I'm sure," he said. "I thought it was about scale, how much impact I could have. But I realized something. The scale doesn't matter if you lose the reason you started. And my reason is here." Her eyes softened. "You could have both, you know. Some people manage it." "Maybe," he said, "but I know myself. I'd end up chasing the bigger stage until there was nothing left of this." She reached across the table and took his hand. "Then you made the right choice." The next few months passed in a rhythm Adrian had almost forgotten existed. Steady, predictable, even quiet. Aurora's project expanded. The art center thrived, and the solar partnership broke ground on its largest installation yet. Adrian kept showing up for soccer games, science fairs, and impromptu living room concerts. He still wore suits, still closed deals, still commanded rooms. But he also learned to braid hair without tangling it and could now identify every single character in Tessa's favorite cartoon. On the first warm evening of spring, they had dinner in the backyard, grilled chicken, fresh bread, and lemonade the twins had made themselves. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Jules asked, "Are you going to be our dad forever now?" The question was so direct it caught Adrian off guard. He glanced at Elena, who smiled faintly but didn't intervene. "Yes," he said simply, "if that's what you want." Tess nodded like it was obvious. "We already decided." Elena's hand brushes under the table, and in that small, wordless gesture, he felt the truth of it. They were already a family. Titles didn't matter. Weeks later, on the anniversary of the Art Center's opening, Adrian stood on its stage again. This time, he wasn't defending himself or his company. He was announcing a new fund, jointly managed by Aurora and the Center, that would provide grants to community programs across the country. In the front row, Elena and the twins watched, beaming. When the applause rose, he didn't see an audience. He saw the life he'd chosen. The war for Aurora had made him a fighter again. But this, standing here, surrounded by the people and the work that gave his fight meaning, this had made him whole. And for the first time in his life, Adrian Cole knew that he didn't need a bigger stage. He had everything he wanted right here. A search tab blinked at him, patient. He typed Sarah Mitchell and the city. The results were a crowded street of strangers' faces. Then another search, narrower, sifted a profile photo that made the floor tilt again. Not because she was beautiful, though she was in that real, unstudioed way, but because his brain dragged up a smell, salt air, and cheap conference coffee, a hotel bar with industrial chandeliers in San Diego, the brilliance in a woman's eyes when she didn't need to borrow yours to make a point. One weekend. He had left on Sunday night with a plane to catch and an assistant whose entire job was to barricade his life from the mess of feeling. He clicked through. In a handful of photos, A child leaned against Sarah's hip. Brown hair, a grin with too many teeth, and eyes, steel blue, familiar in the way your own signature is familiar. He stood up, and his body made a decision before his mind caught it. "Car," he said into the intercom. "Now." He didn't see the way Margaret's eyebrows flicked. He didn't hear her tell security to route the private elevator. He only heard the roar of his own blood. Manhattan threw itself at the windows of the Mercedes and peeled away again. Midtown to the Bronx took 19 minutes with sirens, privilege, and fortune. It took another lifetime for Max. Sarah's building was brick rubbed raw by seasons, for flights of stairs and a hallway that smelled like cabbage and something sharp. Unit 4B had a chain lock and a peephole. His knock sounded foreign to him. The chain slid. The door opened a hand's width, and one brown eye fixed him in a slice. Recognition widened it. "Mr. Pierce," Sarah said, voice low, as if she could keep the name from traveling down the hall. "We need to talk," he managed. Authority was a muscle. His had never failed him. It quivered now. The chain scraped. The door opened. She was older than a hotel bar, but the same architecture. Eyes that didn't blink first, a mouth that could be kind or a blade depending on what you handed it. Exhaustion had penciled itself under her eyes. It didn't diminish her. Behind her, a small face peered around a door jamb and then ducked back. "Are you really my daddy?" the small face asked the room. Max didn't have an answer that fit in his mouth. The apartment was spotless in the way of people who refused to let circumstances bully them. A stack of textbooks turned an end table into a foothold. A corner held a laptop and a nest of programming manuals. The kitchen counter had a cereal box and nothing that looked like indulgence. "Emily," Sarah said, steady in a way that told him she had to be steady on days worse than this one. "Go play for a few minutes, please." The door closed with a pointed look over the shoulder that said, "I see you." "Sit," Sarah said. He didn't. "Is she mine?" The question hit the air like a thrown hammer. Sarah's jaw tightened. "Yes." "That's impossible." He heard how it sounded and hated himself and couldn't help it. "I was told I can't have children. When I was 14. Medical facts can be wrong," she said, and laughed and nicked the edge of the words. "Not cruel. Tired. I tried to tell you. For months. Your assistant blocked every number I had." He thought of a younger Margaret, efficient to cruelty because that's what he had paid for. "I need a test," he said. "Of course." She crossed her arms as if to keep herself from shaking. "I have nothing to hide." "I never asked you for anything," she added, and the words had a scrape in them that said, "Don't you dare." "We've managed." Max's eyes fell on the fridge. A drawing, printed in marker uncertainty. A small girl labeled me. A taller one labeled Mom, and a figure wearing a lopsided crown surrounded by floating dollar signs labeled Dad in New York. Something gave way in him. He didn't know what it was until later. "I'd like to meet her properly," he said, and his voice did a thing it didn't do in earnings calls. Surprise flickered across Sarah's face and made her younger for a heartbeat. Hope complicated it. "You do." The bedroom door cracked a diplomatic inch. "Are you done talking about me yet?" "Come say hello, Emily," Sarah said. The girl padded out, solemn with the gravity of first grade. Wavy brown hair. A pink T-shirt with a stray glitter unicorn. And those eyes, God help him, those blueprints he signed every morning in the mirror. She stuck out her hand like a CEO closing a deal. "I'm Emily Mitchell. I'm in first grade and I'm good at math." Max knelt. His knees creaked and the carpet smelled like detergent. He took her hand. "I'm Maxwell Pierce," he said. "I'm good at math, too." Her smile flashed open like a window. "Can you do fractions?" "We're learning those." He heard Sarah exhale just a little. Some tension he hadn't realized he was wrestling bled out of the room. He wanted to tell Emily about halves and wholes, and how some things take longer to divide and longer to add. He wanted to tell her he had missed 6 years by accident and 6 years by design. He wanted to tell her he was sorry. But sorry is a word children learn to distrust early. "Fractions are my favorite," he said instead. The test took blood and a consent form in 3 days. The 3 days took everything else. He moved through meetings like a man underwater, words swimming toward him with trailing ties of context, and none of them sticking. A vice president asked him about a number with a great deal of zeros, and he said, "Not today," and watched the man's face try to process a new language. On the second night, he walked his penthouse and realized it was loud with quiet. In the kitchen, a violet plastic cup had appeared next to the crystal. The housekeeper, bless her, had heard him mention a guest and gone shopping. He picked up the cup and felt ridiculous, and then felt something else and put it down very gently. On the third morning, his private line trilled. Arthur Weinstein lit the screen. "It's confirmed," Arthur said, no preface, "because men who have stood next to each other for 20 years don't need one. 99.9998. You are the father." Max's chair didn't move. The building did. "How?" he asked, and the word wasn't a question so much as a protest. "They told me." "Doctors are wrong sometimes," Arthur said, "or they lie because someone pays them to. We can chase that later if you want." Another crack, quieter, somewhere deeper. He looked at his hands and didn't recognize them. "I need to see them," he said. He was early to the cafe. Sarah arrived exactly on time. Hair swept back, a posture that had learned to carry weight, without showing where it hurt, without Emily between them. The table felt too small. "The test confirmed it," he said, "because honesty is a ladder and this was the first rung." "I never doubted it," she said, and the words were not triumph but fatigue. "I want to be part of her life." He didn't plan the sentence. It arrived and sat in the space like an uninvited guest he realized he'd needed all along. Sarah's fingers tightened around her coffee. Just like that. "I missed 6 years." He swallowed. "I don't want to miss any more." "This isn't a business acquisition," she said, and the old and bristled on reflex and then sat back down. "You don't decide and take over. She has routines, feelings, a mother." "I know." For once, he did not argue. "Teach me." She blinked, just once. It knocked something out of place in her expression and let light through. "Why?" she asked. Not hostile, not even skeptical. Curious. In that way people are when they aren't sure if the person across from them knows their own answer. "When I heard her voice," he said slowly, choosing each word as if it cost him, "something shifted. And when I saw her, my mother's eyes," he stopped because that cliff was tall and old. "I've spent my life chasing a target that moves every time you touch it. I don't want to run anymore." Sarah looked at him for a long time. The cafe clattered around them with other stories. A barista laughed. A spoon chimed. "What do you need?" he asked finally. "You and Emily." "That's such a CEO question," she said, but the bite had dulled. "We don't need to be fixed. We need someone who shows up." "I can do that." "Can you?" She tilted her head. "Because the Maxwell I met once upon a conference didn't show up for anything but the deal. People change." He almost said like a slogan, but slogans don't move people. "I want to try," he said instead, and felt the truth of it, raw and unmarketed. He walked her back to the apartment because the city felt safer with a destination. In the elevator, a kid in a Spider-Man hoodie stared at him like television had gotten loose. On the fourth floor, a woman with a laundry basket let them by and winked at Sarah like the entire building had already decided what story they were in. At the door, he hesitated. The impulse to offer, to fix, to pour money over problems until the edges disappeared, rose like muscle memory. "You're building," he said, meaning the elevator that coughed and the stairwell that smelled like everything and the lock that looked tired. "We're not a charity," Sarah said, not angry, just tired of certain roads. "I know." He surprised himself by meaning it. Then small things. Groceries. A car service for medical appointments. No strings. She let the list hang between them. "We'll see." He turned to go. The door opened again a hand's width. Emily's face slotted into the gap. "Are you coming back?" she asked. Max felt the answer arrive like sunrise. "Yes." "When?" "Soon." He had never said the word, and meant it as much as he did now. He had never realized how long soon could be. She studied him with his own eyes. "Okay," she said, "but don't be late. Mommy says grown-ups who are late make people feel small." He nodded and didn't know whether to laugh or weep. back in his office. The skyline didn't look like a prize anymore. It looked like a question. Margaret hovered in the doorway. "Do you want me to move the quarterly readout?" "Move everything." He loosened his tie and dropped into the chair like he was learning to sit. "Accept the call with Boston at 4. She blinked. "Boston? Children's Hospital." He paused. "And Margaret?" "Thank you." She inclined her head. 15 years and 100 battles, and neither of them had learned what to do with gratitude when it was naked. She closed the door. He picked up the phone. He dialed the same number he'd dialed that morning. Not to scold, not to measure, but to tell a truth into the space between. The line connected. It rang once, twice, 3 times. A small voice answered, and the crack that had begun at 8:03 a.m. traveled to the floor, up the glass, across the skyline. "Hello." "Hi, Emily." "It's Max." A rustle, a door hinge, a whisper that tried and failed to be quiet. "Mommy says you're my daddy." He didn't sleep that night. He counted the seconds between the red blink of the router and the white pulse of the smoke detector and invented a math problem to survive the hours. If each blink is 1 breath, how many breaths does it take to stop being the man you were at breakfast? By morning, his tie felt like an apology nobody asked for. "Reschedule the 9, Max told Margaret without looking up. "And hold the 11. I'll be out." "Max," she said gently, "I can have legal reach out first." "No lawyers." He pocketed his phone like a talisman and stepped into the private elevator before caution could grow teeth. New York threw itself at him. Traffic stacked like Tetris blocks, pedestrians hammering crosswalks, a delivery guy with 6 coffees and 1 life. The car slid north, then east, bleeding velocity at each light until the towers gave way to lower brick, graffiti script, laundry like flags of ordinary countries. Unit 4B looked the same as yesterday had described it. The chain snaked through the latch. The peephole glittered like a fish eye. His knock landed, and he heard it echo down a hallway that knew every tenant's habits. Footsteps, the scrape of the chain, a woman's face in a slice of morning. Sarah held the door there, uncertain how much of him to let in. Up close, he could see the night in her eyes, the long practice of being brave where no one clapped. Mr. Pierce. "Max," he said, because Mr. Pierce was built for boardrooms, not thresholds. "May I come in?" She weighed the question like it could break something delicate. Then she unhooked the chain. The apartment smelled of laundry, soap, and pencil shavings. A row of shoes lined the wall, tiny sneakers leading up to 2 pairs of work-tired flats. On the fridge, magnets herded paper into order, a reading log, a food bank schedule, a sketch of a rabbit with enormous ears. "Emily's at school," Sarah said, closing the door. "I didn't know if you'd actually come." "Neither did I," he admitted, which was the truth and the strangest thing he'd said in months. "I'm not here to make a scene or—" He gestured helplessly, encompassing money, history, his own reputation. I'm here to listen." Something passed through her face. Surprise, then skepticism, then the smallest nod. She gestured to the sofa. He sat. It tried to be firm. It failed politely. "I want a DNA test," he said, before courage could sour into performance. "Not because I don't believe you, because once it's official, no one can argue with me when I say she's mine." You could see the sentence hit the old bruise in her. No one listened when I tried, and see it decide not to land. "All right," she said. "I already spoke to the clinic at Mount Sinai last night. They can take your sample this afternoon." "Thank you." Silence settled. Not hostile, not friendly. 2 people who had once known each other in a way that didn't require last names now measuring the distance with their eyes. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked finally, hating the edge in his voice and leaving it there anyway. "I did." No heat, just fact. "For months. Your assistant screened my calls. My emails bounced with polite auto-replies. I mailed a letter. I mailed 3. I told myself you were too busy. Then I told myself you were making a choice. Then I stopped telling myself anything and raised a baby." He absorbed that in the place where men put the things they can't fix. "I'm sorry." Her laugh was small and sharp. "You don't get point for that." "I'm not asking for points." He spread his hands. I'm asking for a place to stand that isn't a courtroom. You'll need to earn it. She stood, as if the conversation was a room, and she could only breathe at the window. Routines matter to her. Consistency. She's 6. Any tremor in the ground feels like an earthquake. I can be consistent. You've been consistently absent. He nodded because there was nothing else to do with that sentence but hold it and not break. On the coffee table lay a stack of borrowed library books, one with dog-eared pages and a princess in sneakers on the cover, one about space. A crayon rolled, bumped his wrist, and stopped. He picked it up and set it back. She told me. He trailed off. The line felt like glass. He didn't know how much to put his weight on it. Sarah spared him. I know what she told you. I heard with my own ears and want to crawl out of my body. He looked up. Is it true that you said that? She asks, Sarah said simply. Kids ask. So I answer without lying. I told her the man I met once upon a time was brilliant and ambitious and didn't know how to make space for anything that didn't look like a goal. I told her I tried to tell him, and maybe he never got the messages, and maybe he did. I told her he wasn't in our lives, but that didn't make him a villain. It made him a fact. He didn't realize until then how loudly he'd been braced for contempt. The absence of it didn't absolve him. It just made room for something else to stand up. I'd like to pick her up from school. The sentence startled them both with its domesticity. If you're comfortable. Sarah's head tilted. Evaluating risk, vectors the world had forced her to master. You know what school she goes to? He smiled without humor. I am unreasonably good at research. I know. For the first time, a corner of her mouth moved, the ghost of a conference weekend grin. Pickup is at 2:50. She comes out the east gate. She'll be the one arguing with the crossing guard about right away like a tiny lawyer. I'll be there. He rose, and the room seemed to rise with him, as if suddenly the furniture believed the day might end differently than it began. He reached the door, then turned. I'm not trying to buy forgiveness, Sarah, but if there's anything you need between now and whatever this becomes. She blew out a breath. The light in the hallway flickers. The super keeps saying he'll fix it. He won't. Bring a bulb. He blinked. Then he nodded, almost bowing. Bulb. Got it. On the way down the stairs. He had to grip the handrail, because laughter arrived in him without warning. Not amusement so much as relief that the world still contained instructions he could follow. At 2:44 p.m., he stood behind a line of parents holding tote bags and fatigue. The school fence was a mural of laminated announcements. Book fair flew shots. Be kind or be quiet. A crossing guard would whistle, and the bearing of a general managed the chaos he admired. The doors burst and released a tide. Backpacks bounced. Velcro sang. Children poured into the afternoon like confetti someone had been storing all day just to throw at his chest. Emily saw him first, or maybe she scanned for him on pure hope. Her face went from ordinary after school to something almost dangerous in its brightness. She ran, then remembered the no-running rule, and turned it into an aggressive walk that fooled absolutely no one. You came, she said, which was braver than hello and heavier. I said I would. She looked past him instinctively for permission. Sarah leaned on the fence a few parents down, raised a hand. Emily's shoulders dropped into relief. What do you want to do first? She asked, and the universe became a menu. What do you usually do? Sometimes we get a popsicle from the lady with the bell, but Mommy says we can't every day because teeth. She showed him the gap where a tooth had recently decided to retire. Sometimes we go to the park. Sometimes we go straight home because there are casseroles. Casseroles. Food bank casseroles. They are medium. Park. He said immediately, because his bones told him he would learn more about fractions and people by pushing a swing than by opening his wallet. The park hosting hour 3 of a weekday afternoon looks like a treaty. Parents on benches trading small talk and glances. Nannies cluster like a union. Toddlers doing anthropological studies with sticks. He bought 2 small juice boxes and 1 coffee that should have been illegal for its sins. Higher. Emily demanded on the swing, and he pushed her into a sky that understood the script. At the apex, she let go with 1 hand. His heart fell through a trapdoor, then landed when she did. Do you live in a castle? she asked on the return arc. Purely informational, the way she might ask if his car came in other colors. I live in a very tall apartment, he said. It has elevators that don't smell like pickles. Ours smells like pickles, she said mournfully, which made him irrationally furious at an infrastructure problem. I brought a light bulb, he blurted. She twisted in the swing to squint at him. For your hall. A big one. The super will hate it. Good. She kicked. Do you have any pets? No. He thought of meetings that had gone late, and flights that didn't ask you if you'd eaten breakfast. Do you? She pointed with her chin to a stuffed rabbit poking out of her backpack, like a shy stowaway. Mr. Ears. He is an inside pet. Excellent name. She considered him. You talk fancy. He laughed, and the sound startled a pair of pigeons into the air. I'll learn to talk Emily. Good, she said again, satisfied, because sometimes grown-ups who talk fancy forget to say the important part. What's the important part? She leaned back until her hair skimmed the ground, looked at the world upside down, and said, as if reading from a manual, I love you, then added quickly, I don't mean now. I mean when people do. Understood. He put a hand on the chain of the swing and slowed her gently, because suddenly the air felt crowded with sentences he wasn't allowed to say yet. At home, she dumped her backpack on the rug and produced a worksheet. Fractions, she announced with the gravitas of a court clerk. Pizza addition. He sat on the rug, because chairs were for people who didn't have the privilege of doing this. Pizza is the best way to learn math. You can have 3/8, she said magnanimously, dividing a circle with a green crayon. I will have 5/8 because I am growing. He tried. He failed once on purpose. She corrected him patiently, with the kindness of the merciful. Sarah watched in the kitchen doorway, arms crossed, face undecided between worry and wonder. When the worksheet lay done and the juice boxes lay empty, she cleared her throat. Homework is finished, mathematically obliterated. Max said, earning a fleeting eye roll that tasted like victory. He stood. I should go before I make the mistake of promising a puppy. Too late, Emily said. But okay, tomorrow. He looked at Sarah again. She didn't make him beg. We have the clinic at 4 for the test, she said. Come at 3. We'll go together. 3, he echoed, and it sounded like a chord resolving. At the door, he handed Sarah a brown paper bag he'd been carrying like contraband. She raised an eyebrow. Groceries, he said. Just staples. No strings. And a light bulb that could interrogate a spy. She accepted it with the resigned grace of someone who has learned to let people help them without being rewritten by it. Thank you. He hesitated. The hallway bulb flickered mournfully, a little theater of decay above their heads. He climbed onto the second stair, reached up, and twisted the old bulb out, then replaced it with a new one. Light poured into the narrow corridor like a decision. Somewhere, a door opened, a girl peered out and grinned. Hero, Emily whispered, awed. I loosened it for him, Sarah said dryly, and he wanted to kiss the place in the air where her humor had just stood. The clinic turned blood into promise and promise into paper. A tech with a nose ring and a perfect bedside cadence swabbed cheeks, labeled vials, and told him the lab was fast when it mattered. 3 days, she said. Sometimes 2. 2 was a country they'd never been to. On the way out, Sarah paused by a row of chairs where a boy in a cape negotiated with his mother about bravery. She watched them with a look Max recognized from mirrors. What will I have to be today? Thank you, she said quietly, eyes still on the cape. For showing up? You asked for consistency, he said. I can do that. It wasn't a test. She glanced at him. It was a boundary. I'm learning the difference. He meant it. He also, in the next breath, betrayed his apprenticeship. I've been thinking about your apartment. She sighed, but not like a door closing, more like a tired person sitting down. Max, not castles. He raised both hands. Just something safer, in the same neighborhood, close to the school. No pickles. She worked her jaw, an invisible calculus behind her eyes. We'll revisit after the test. He nodded. You could build empires between now and after if you knew how to wait. The first night, he didn't know where to put his hands. The penthouse was all right angles and professional lighting, and a view that performed on demand. It looked like someone else's success. He took off his jacket and draped it over a chair and took a breath that made his ribs feel unfamiliar. He walked down the hall to a room that had never been anything but storage until this morning. The housekeeper had moved with ruthless efficiency. It smelled faintly of lavender and new plastic. A small bed with a purple quilt. A bookshelf with the first brave row of paperbacks. On the dresser, a frame with a photo Sarah had texted on request. Emily at 3, frosting on her lip like a warrior's paint. He stood there so long the city ran its fingers across the glass and left. He wrote an email to his COO canceling a dinner with investors. He texted Margaret no calls after 7, unless it's a building on fire or the SEC. He put his phone face down and let the silence be what it was instead of what he made it stand for. At 7:58, his screen lit anyway. Unknown. He nearly didn't pick up. He did. Hi. Emily, in a voice like a blanket. Mommy says it's okay to call you for 2 minutes. You can call me for 3, he said, sitting on the edge of the small bed. So he'd remember which world he was in. How was bedtime? Mr. Ears fell behind the dresser. She reported gravely. It was very dangerous, but we saved him. A pause. Do you have a bedtime? I'm learning one. Mommy says grown-ups need sleep or their brains fall out. Sound medical advice. Okay, she said, satisfied. Good night, Max. Good night, Emily. The line clicked. He didn't move until the clock stuttered at 8:05, and the purple quilt turned into a rectangle again instead of a portal. On the second day, he found himself in a grocery aisle at dusk, reading labels like they were financial disclosures. A child-sized cereal box didn't weigh anything and weighed everything. On impulse, he added a ridiculous novelty toothbrush to the basket, the kind that lit up like a police car when you brush for the approved amount of time. At checkout, a teenager with pink hair glanced up, recognized him, and smothered it behind an excellent poker face. Big night? She deadpanned, scanning the toothbrush. The biggest, he said, and she smiled like she knew he wasn't joking. On the third day, the lab called. He was in a meeting he'd been meaning to cancel and forgot. A slide glowed on the wall, growth projections curving up like someone had bent them with a hand. His phone vibrated on the table. Mount Sinai Genetics. I have to take this, he told the room, and left before anyone could perform concern. In the hallway, the voice was careful, gentle, and exactly as precise as he wanted his world to be now. Mr. Pierce, we have your results. Paternity is confirmed with a probability of 99.9998%. Time didn't stop. It narrowed to a needle's eye could pass through or get torn on. Thank you, he said, because you always thank people who brought you news that rearranged your bones. He hung up. The glass of the conference room reflected him as he was. Not as he was on magazine covers. Tie crooked, hair a little undone, a man with a fact in his pocket, and an apartment suddenly much too large for a person who wasn't going to change. He texted Sarah. It's official. When can I come by? The dots appeared, disappeared, appeared. After school. She'll want to hear it from you. He sent back a thumbs up and hated the way it looked, and then laughed because apparently you can learn to hate and love a thing in a single second and call it progress. He arrived early. The hallway bulb was on, bright as promise. He knocked. The door opened. Emily didn't let him finish hello before she dragged him to the couch like a lawyer presenting Exhibit A. Do the results say yes? She asked, because small hearts don't survive ambiguity. They say yes, he said, and watched the word unwrap a room. She launched herself at him. He wasn't ready. He almost fell. He didn't. He steadied and felt arms around his neck that weighed exactly what meaning weighs. Okay, she said into his collar. Good. Now we can do everything. What is everything? He asked into her hair. Pancakes on Saturdays. Pizza on Fridays. Reading all the long books. Halloween costumes that are not from a bin. Done, he said, because some deals should be closed without due diligence. Over her shoulder, Sarah leaned in the kitchen doorway, hands wrapped around a mug like a lifeline. Relief had made a room in her face next to caution. He met her eyes and nodded, not victory, not conquest, agreement. Also, Emily said, pulling back to make sure he could see her mouth for the important part, you can come to my class for family day. We are allowed to bring one grown-up. I pick you. The breath left him in a whoosh. Your mom. I pick you both. She cut through protocol with the ruthless mercy of 6. 2 grown-ups in one slot. It's fine. Ms. Patel likes us. He laughed, and then, unexpectedly, he cried, quietly, stupidly, with his shoulders trying not to move. Emily looked startled for a heartbeat, then terribly competent. She patted his cheek with a tiny palm. It's okay, she said. Grown-ups cry too. Mommy says it's when your heart is growing. Sarah set the mug down and crossed the room and sat on the sofa arm, like landing on a moving thing. She didn't touch him. She didn't need to. He felt steadied anyway. They spilled the fact onto the rest of the afternoon. They called Arthur, who didn't say I told you, so because good lawyers never waste time on that. They told Margaret, who said, I'll handle the calendar, and hung up before he could ruin the dignity of the moment with gratitude. As the sun slid out of the Bronx and into the river, Emily dug in her backpack and produced a sheet of paper. She smoothed it on her knees and handed it to him solemnly. It was another drawing. 3 figures again, but the crown was gone. In its place, a tie. Crooked, purple, ridiculous, drawn carefully around the neck of the tallest. Above them all, in letters big enough to be read from orbit, U.S. He cleared his throat. This is very advanced typography. It is, she said gravely, then broke into a grin that would buy out any company on Earth if it were a stock. Now we need pancakes. It's Tuesday. So practice pancakes, she said, unimpeachable. He stood and rolled his sleeves. Sarah started to protest, you don't have to, and then didn't. She handed him a bowl. He took it. A small domestic choreography began to write itself into the air and then into muscle memory. Reach, measure, stir, laugh, burn one, try again. Flour powdered his cuff. Emily's nose wore a bright white dash like war paint. Sarah exhaled a sound that could, with time, learn to be called a laugh in the evenings. After the first edible batch, while butter sizzled and syrup considered its options, Max's phone buzzed on the counter. He glanced. Unknown number. He almost ignored it. He didn't. Hello. A stranger's voice clipped an official. Mr. Pierce? This is Dr. Winters from Mount Sinai Children's. I'm calling about a referral that came through our system this afternoon for Emily Mitchell. Do you have a moment to discuss some preliminary findings? The kitchen went very still. Max looked at Sarah. Sarah looked at Max. Emily licked syrup from her thumb and didn't know yet that some sentences don't belong in kitchens. Yes, Max said, steadying his voice on the counter's edge. We have a moment. And the world, which had just expanded to fit a new fact, narrowed again to fit another, one with jagged edges and a name they didn't know yet. The kitchen's hum had changed. A second ago it was a quiet chaos of syrup dripping, forks clinking, and Emily humming a tune she half invented. Now it was something else entirely, stillness that seemed to drink the air. Max's hand was tight around the phone, and his other palm pressed against the counter, like he might fall to the floor if he didn't anchor himself. Sarah's eyes searched his face for meaning, but all she got was a kind of practiced masked man like him used in negotiations. Except this wasn't a boardroom, and she wasn't an opponent. She was a mother, and her child's name had just come out of a doctor's mouth. This is Dr. Winters from Mount Sinai Children's. The voice repeated, calm but clipped. I'm calling about a referral we received for Emily Mitchell. Are you somewhere private? Max looked at Sarah. Sarah looked at Emily, who was trying to cut a pancake with the determination of a small engineer. Hold on, Max said, covering the mouthpiece. Can you give me just a second? Sarah understood instantly. She slid off the counter and crouched beside Emily. Hey, sweetheart, why don't you take Mr. Ears to your room and pick a book for after dinner? Emily frowned but didn't question. She scooped up her stuffed rabbit, leaving a trail of sticky fingerprints across the table, and padded down the hall. The sound of her door clicking shut was soft, but it changed everything. Max brought the phone back up. Yes, I'm in private now. What's going on? I don't want to alarm you unnecessarily, Dr. Winters began, which was exactly the kind of phrase that alarmed people. Emily's recent intake form included some details about persistent fatigue and occasional joint pain. We also saw a note about frequent bruising. Max's mind scrambled, trying to attach those symptoms to something harmless, growing pains, clumsiness, playground accidents. But the doctor's tone told him those guesses would be too easy. I'd like to run a full panel, Winters continued. Blood work, a bone marrow scan if indicated. There's nothing definitive at this stage, but the symptoms suggest we should rule out certain hematologic conditions. Sarah had stepped closer, close enough to hear. Her face was pale, and her hands had found each other, fingers lacing tight. What conditions? She asked, her voice so steady it sounded unnatural. There was a pause, the kind that lets you know the next words are the ones that matter. Leukemia is one possibility, Winters said. Again, I'm not saying this is a diagnosis, just that it's important we check sooner rather than later. Max's chest felt like it had been fitted with a vice. He had been in hostile takeovers, legal battles, and boardroom ambushes, but nothing had ever reached into him like this, rearranging his insides with 4 syllables. What do we do? He asked. I can see her tomorrow morning. If you can bring her in by 8, we'll start with blood work and go from there. In the meantime, keep an eye on any new bruises or signs of fever. And try to keep a routine as normal as possible. Stress isn't helpful right now. Normal. The word almost made him laugh. Thank you, Doctor, Sarah said, taking over before Max could find his breath. We'll be there. When the call ended, the silence between them was heavier than any argument they'd ever had. Sarah leaned back against the counter, eyes closing for just a moment. She's been tired lately. I thought it was just school growth spurts. Max ran a hand down his face. Why didn't you tell me? Her eyes snapped open. I didn't know there was something to tell Max. You think I'd hide this? He exhaled hard, guilt already burning through him. No, God, I hate that this is the first time I'm hearing it, and it's from a stranger. It's from a doctor, she corrected, her voice flat. And now we do what parents do. We show up. He nodded, because there was nothing else. They didn't tell Emily. Not yet. That night, they read the book she'd picked. Something about a mouse who wanted to be an astronaut, and laughed in all the right places. But Max kept seeing her wrists when she turned the pages, how thin they looked, the faint yellow-green bloom of a bruise just above her elbow. Sleep was a rumor in his penthouse that night. At 2 a.m., he was at his laptop, reading medical journals and parent forums until his vision blurred. None of it made him feel more in control. If anything, the knowledge sharpened the fear. At 7:15, he was outside Sarah's building with coffee and a paper bag of bagels. Like food could armor them. Emily bounded out in a pink hoodie, hair in uneven pigtails, clutching Mr. Ears. She climbed into the car without asking where they were going. The hospital smelled like antiseptic, and the kind of hope that's rationed carefully. Dr. Winters was younger than Max expected, with a steady gaze and a handshake that said she knew how to talk to terrified parents. Emily was brave through the blood draw, only flinching once. Max held her free hand. Sarah rubbed her back, and they both made the kind of silly promises you make to children in hospital rooms. Ice cream, playground time, maybe even a puppy. Promises you pray you'll get to keep. After, while Emily was distracted by a sticker cart, Dr. Winters pulled them aside. Results should be back within 48 hours. If it's what I suspect, we'll move quickly with a treatment plan. If not, we'll keep looking. Max didn't ask what move quickly meant. He didn't want to hear it yet. On the way out, Emily asked for pancakes again. Max drove them to a diner, the kind with sticky menus and waitresses who call everyone Han. Sarah watched him across the booth, and for a moment, the past and present collided. Two people who had once shared late-night milkshakes, now bracing for something neither of them could control. They didn't talk about the test. They talked about how Mr. Ears might need his own chair at Family Day, about how Emily wanted to be a detective when she grew up because they get to wear hats. But later, when Emily excused herself to the restroom, Sarah leaned in. If this is serious, Max, I'm not sure I can do it alone. You won't have to, he said, and he meant it with the kind of steel that had built his empire. The next day felt longer than the year before it. Max canceled meetings without explanation. Sarah kept Emily's schedule normal, walking her to school like nothing had changed. But in the quiet moments, waiting at red lights, folding laundry, both of them felt the weight of the clock. At 4:17 p.m., Max's phone rang. It was Dr. Winters. And the look on Sarah's face as he answered told him she already knew. Hospitals always put the hard conversations in rooms with soft lamps. This one had a watercolor beach that no one believed in, 2 chairs angled toward a small table, like the furniture had rehearsed how to break bad news kindly. Dr. Winters was already there when the nurse led them in. She closed the door gently, sat, and folded her hands on a folder with Emily's name printed in block letters. Max took the chair on the left. Sarah took the one on the right. Neither of them took off their coats. "I'm going to speak plainly," Dr. Winters said, "and then I'm going to repeat myself as many times as you need." Max's fingers tightened on the armrest. Sarah's jaw set. "The blood work shows abnormal white blood cells and blasts in circulation." Winters continued, calm but not cold. "Emily has acute lymphoblastic leukemia." All. Silence didn't fall. It arrived and sat down with them. Sarah's mouth opened and closed once, like a swimmer coming up in the wrong place. Is she going to? "All is the most common childhood cancer," Winters said, anticipating the unfinishable. "And we've gotten very good at treating it. With prompt, appropriate therapy, the cure rates are high, over 80% in Emily's risk category. It's a long road, but it is a road." Max found a breath and held it like contraband. "What happens now?" "We admit her tonight," Winters said. "We'll place a central line, called a port, tomorrow so we can give medicines without repeated IVs. Then we start induction chemotherapy. It's intense at first. There will be side effects, hair loss, fatigue, risk of infection. You'll learn to read fevers like weather. But you won't be alone. We'll walk you through every step." Sarah nodded, but it was a nod you give when your body is still 10 seconds behind your mind. "What do we tell her?" "The truth," Winters said, in words that match her world. "That there are bad cells in her blood, making her tired, and we have strong medicine to help. That she didn't cause it. That it's okay to be scared. That we're on her team." Team. Max swallowed hard. He had always been captain and coach. Today, he wanted to be the bench and the water and the light the games were played under. "We'll need to discuss fertility preservation. Steroids, a calendar that will become your new Bible." Winters went on. "Insurance, social work, school accommodations, siblings." "Just Emily," Sarah said softly. Winters revised her script without blinking. "Good. One less logistics layer. Do you have support? Family? Friends?" Sarah glanced at Max, a flicker of old ache and new reality. "We have us." Winters read the exchange and put the folder down like an oath. "Then we start there." They signed forms with hands that had never felt so unruly. A nurse came with a plastic hospital bracelet and a sticker sheet. Sarah held it together through both. Max surprised himself by not breaking when Emily whispered, "Do brave people get to keep their rabbits?" And Dr. Winters said, "Only the bravest ones do." They hadn't told Emily in the room with the watercolor. They told in the playroom, under a mobile of paper stars, because Dr. Winters said hard truths sit better where the walls know laughter. Sarah did most of the talking. Max lent his heartbeat for Emily to lean on. "There are some naughty cells in your blood," Sarah said, keeping her voice in the place where lullabies live. "We're going to take very strong medicine to teach them manners." "Like time out?" Emily asked, suspicious. "Exactly," Sarah said. "A very long time out. And my hair." Emily put a hand on her pigtails like a queen checking a crown. "It might fall out for a while," Sarah said. Her voice wavered and found itself again. "But it will grow back. We can get you a hat collection that makes the queen jealous." Emily considered this, then flicked her eyes to Max. "Will you still know me if I look like a potato?" Max's laugh broke on a rock and kept going anyway. "I'll know you anywhere." They moved fast because fear moves fast, and you don't make it run alone. Paperwork turned into a room with a window and a view of a brick wall where pigeons held committee. A child life specialist arrived like sunshine with a practical belt. Stickers, markers, a doll with a removable hat to practice hair law stories. A social worker appeared with forms that asked if you were okay, you weren't, and what would make you less not okay, nothing and everything. As evening thickened against the glass, Sarah sat beside Emily's bed, reading the same paragraph 3 times. Emily kept interrupting to give her rabbit a medical degree. Dr. Ears says the medicine will be yucky but worth it, she proclaimed solemnly. He went to rabbit school. Max stood by the window and called Margaret. Clear my calendar indefinitely, he said. There was a beat. All of it. All of it. Understood, she said, because she had built a career on making impossible sound like a list. I'll triage to Lena and Arturo. I'll tell the board you're out on a family medical leave. Do you want a statement drafted? Later, he said. The word tasted like mercy. And Max? She added, voice shifting to the frequency they rarely used. I'm so sorry. Thank you, he said, and meant it more than any shareholder letter he'd ever signed. He texted his 2 lines. You're acting CEO for now. Use the plan in the folder labeled, in case of meteor. You'll do fine. The reply came back in under a minute. Go be where you need to be. We've got you. He stared at the pigeon committee until the pigeons adjourned. When he turned back, Emily had fallen asleep mid-sentence, her hand still on her rabbit's ear. Sarah sat motionless, book in her lap, the power outlet's orange glow painting a tiny sunrise on her cheek. She asked me if she could still go to Family Day, Sarah whispered, without looking up. I said we bring Family Day to her. We will, Max said, we'll bring the whole school if we have to. She looked at him then, and the past wasn't a weapon. It was context. I don't know how to do this, she said. Neither do I, he admitted. But I'm not leaving. A nurse poked her head in with a kind smile. Vitals in 20. Mom, Dad, try to rest. The word hung there, simple as a noun in a grammar book. Neither of them corrected it. At 2:13 a.m., alarms didn't go off, but fear did. Emily stirred, whimpering, fingers clutching at the air. Sarah was standing before the sheet, had time to wrinkle. Max was right behind her. Scary dream? Sarah smoothed the sweaty hair from Emily's forehead. I was on a boat, Emily murmured. The sky was falling off, but then Dr. Ears had a cape. Max exhaled, the rush of oxygen audible in the quiet. Smart rabbit. They doze in shifts, the way people do when there's a new gravity in the room and no manual for it. At dawn, a pale square of light gathered on the floor. The day nurse arrived with logistics that would, soon, feel like ritual, temp check, blood pressure, oral meds. A surgeon came to consent for the port, outlining risks and benefits in a language the heart understands as. We will poke, we will fix, we will try our absolute best. Emily signed the form with the practiced flourish of a first grader who had decided to be impressive even here. Will it hurt? She asked. You'll be asleep, the surgeon said. When you wake up, you'll have a small bump here. She tapped near her collarbone. Like a secret button only your medical team knows about. Like a superhero? Emily asked, intrigued. Exactly like one. When they wheeled her toward the elevator, Emily held both of their hands, one small palm in each of theirs. Come with me till the doors, she commanded. No kissing in the hall. You're very specific, Max said, relief turning into humor because humor is a bridge. Ms. Patel says good instructions make better art, Emily replied, as if this explained everything. At the surgical doors, nurses in blue masks took over with a choreography that was both ordinary and glorious. Emily looked suddenly small again. Her grip tightened. Deal? She asked, eyes flicking between them. The deal, Max said. Disney World when the doctor says we can. And pancakes tomorrow. Hospital ones. Sarah bent and kissed her forehead. The kind of kiss you get like a spell. We'll be right here when you wake up. Promise? Emily whispered. Promise, they said together. The doors closed on a wave of blue scrubs and kindness. The hallway expanded and emptied at the same time. They wandered to the family lounge, Rooms hospitals put grief in on purpose, so it doesn't leak under doors. A muted TV poured weather and commercials into the quiet. Max found a coffee machine and fed it quarters like an ancient god who could be bribed. Sarah sat on a plastic chair and twisted a hair tie until it snapped. He handed her a cup. She took it and stared at the steam like it meant something. "You don't have to be here for every single minute," she said, automatic, the reflex of a woman who has learned not to require anything because requirements get punished. "I do," he said. "I want to." She nodded once, like the inside of her had agreed before the rest could catch up. "Okay." They didn't talk about San Diego. They didn't talk about 7 lost years. They talked about schedules and who would sleep where and how to explain the world with fewer adjectives and more promises. A volunteer came by with a cart of puzzles and grace. Max picked a box at random, and they assembled a lighthouse piece by piece, the kind of task that keeps hands busy while the brain stands at a window. Time, which had been sprinting, slowed its cruel jog and decided to stroll. When Dr. Winters finally appeared, she had a face she practiced in a mirror. Honest good news. "She did beautifully," she said. "The port is in. We'll let her wake up, then bring you back." Sarah let out a breath that sounded like a sob disguised as a laugh. Max closed his eyes briefly, as if thanking a God he didn't formally believe in, then opened them because gratitude is better spent awake. In recovery, Emily looked like a fairy tale after the spell. Human again, hair mussed, cheeks pink. Her lashes fluttered. She blinked up at them. "Did I get my button?" she croaked. "You did," Sarah said. Showed her the small bandage. "Superhero level unlocked." Max added. She smiled, and for a second the room was only that. The afternoon folded into itself with the kind of busy that fools you into thinking you're safe. Medication schedules, a visit from a pharmacist, the first conversation with a nutritionist who came armed with caution and recipes that wouldn't make a 6-year-old mutiny. A social worker sat with them to talk about work leave, bills, foundations that would step into places money didn't know existed. Max kept thinking, I can buy buildings and companies and entire futures. I cannot buy an extra hour of her childhood back if I miss it. At 6 p.m., the door cracked and a head peered around it. Margaret, in a gray sweater instead of her power dresses, holding a tote bag and an expression Max had never seen on her. Something like tenderness she'd kept in a very safe place. "I come bearing contraband," she whispered, as if the room needed quiet even for gifts. "Coloring books, a small army of stickers, and coffee that doesn't taste like despair." Sarah looked startled for a second, then grateful. Emily perked up. "Are you my daddy's boss?" she asked gravely. "On Tuesdays," Margaret said deadpan, and every adult in the room fell a little bit in love with her competence. She stayed 15 minutes and organized 30 problems no one had named aloud. On her way out, she touched Max's shoulder, brief, professional, enough. "You're allowed to be a person," she murmured. "We've trained for this." When the first chemotherapy bag arrived on a tall pole and clicked into place with a sound that would haunt and save them, Emily watched it like a scientist. "Is that the manners medicine?" she asked. "That's it," the nurse said, flushing the line. "It's strong. If you feel funny, tell me." "I always feel funny," Emily replied, perfectly serious, and the nurse laughed like someone who needed exactly that sentence. They started to drip. The room recalibrated its gravity again. As night gathered, Max offered to go home and pack a few things. Sarah hesitated, then nodded. "Sweaters," she said. "She runs cold." "And Mr. Ears needs a change of clothes," Emily added, because priorities. "I'll be back in an hour," he promised. He wasn't. The city had other plans. Down in the lobby, his phone vibrated with the frantic life of a world that had just discovered it could not own him anymore. 2 missed calls from the COO. 5 texts from a board member who refused to learn the lesson. A headline ping from a financial blog. Pierce on leave. Who's really running the ship? He swore under his breath and kept walking. Outside, the evening had that New York brightness that's all electricity and stubbornness. He was 2 steps from the car when the glass doors parted again behind him. "Mr. Pierce?" The voice was too loud for a hospital and too eager for empathy. He turned. A man with a camera hung around his neck, and the hard eyes of someone paid by clicks stood just far enough back to claim he wasn't trespassing. Behind him, another with a mic. Behind him, a third, already lifting a phone. "Is it true your daughter has cancer?" Cameraman asked, skipping courtesy like a stone across water. "Are you stepping down as CEO? Is this a PR stunt?" Max felt the old version of himself stand up in his bones, the one who could reduce men to rumors with a sentence. The new version stood too, and put a hand on the old one's shoulder. He walked over until he could see his reflection in the camera lens. "You're going to step back," he said quietly, "and you're going to do it now. There's a pediatric floor 30 feet above your head. You don't point a lens at that." Cameraman smirked. "You can't tell me." "I can," Max said, not raising his voice, and something in his eyes did the work his lawyers usually did. "And I am." Security, summoned by a nurse with good instincts, materialized and escorted the reporters toward the sidewalk. On his phone, the COO texted again, "Crisis brewing. Board wants you on a call in 20. Max typed with his thumb and didn't bother rehearsing. "Not available. Family. Handle it." He shoved the phone in his pocket, headed for the car, then froze. Through the glass, up at the second-floor landing, a nurse was running, not ordinary hospital quick, but sprinting. Another nurse beckoned from Emily's hallway. Max's body moved before his mind did. He bolted for the elevator and jabbed the button like it had wronged him. It took a lifetime to arrive and another to climb one floor. When the door slid open, he was already out, heart doing a drum solo. Down the hall, Sarah stood outside Emily's room with a look that could stop time. Inside, monitors chimed too fast, and Dr. Winter's voice was crisp and focused. "Temp spiked to 103.6, a nurse reported. "BP dropping. She's lethargic. Cultures now," Winter said. "Broad-spectrum antibiotics. Start the cefepime. Bolus 20 cubic centimeters per kilogram. Page ICU to stand by." Max reached the doorway and stopped because he had learned one thing today. There are moments you do not enter with noise. Emily lay small and flushed, lips dry, eyes half open like she was somewhere very far away listening. Sarah's hand was on their daughter's arm, her other hand braced on the bed rail, to keep from falling out of the world. She looked at Max across a forest of four lines and new wires. For a long second, the only language they had left was the one you speak with your face. "Don't go. I'm here. Don't stop. I won't." "Sepsis protocol initiated," Winters said, and the room leaned toward the child in the bed like every wall had decided to help. Max stepped in, found a piece of the bed where he could rest two fingers against Emily's ankle. Small, hot, real. He kept his voice low and even. "Hey, monkey," he murmured. "We're right here. Deal still stands, okay? Pancakes tomorrow. Rabbit X-rays if necessary." Emily's lashes fluttered once. He chose to believe that meant yes. The 4-pump beeped. A bag changed. A nurse moved like muscle memory in human form. The curtain shifted, admitting a respiratory therapist who brought with him a tank of air and a prayer you have to plug in. "ICU is ready if we need it," Winters said without looking up. Max didn't realize he was holding his breath until he heard Sarah inhale and remembered how. Outside the window, night pressed its forehead to the glass. Inside the room, all the futures in the world narrowed to a number on a monitor and a little girl's next breath. And that was how day one ended. With a promise and a fever, with a decision already made, and 100 more waiting in the hall, with 2 chairs in a room where no one sat down. The beeping was everywhere. Not loud, not urgent the way alarms are on TV, but steady, like a clock counting the seconds you didn't ask to live through. Emily's small body was dwarfed by the hospital bed, her skin too pale against the thin white sheet. A flush burned high on her cheeks from the fever, her lips dry, her breath shallow. Max stood at the foot of the bed, one hand gripping the rail, the other hanging useless at his side. He had been in boardrooms where billions were at stake and felt nothing like this. Here, his heartbeat was the loudest thing in the room, and it wasn't helping anyone. Sarah was by Emily's side, her fingers curled gently around their daughter's arm, as if her touch alone could anchor Emily to the world. She murmured to her, Nonsense words. Familiar words. The kind you say to babies before they understand language. The kind you still say when you have nothing else left. Dr. Winters moved like the center of a wheel, directing nurses, checking monitors, giving orders in that calm, clipped tone Max had already learned to trust. Blood cultures drawn? Good. Get the first dose of cefepime now. Bolus started? Increased to 30 cubic centimeters per kilogram. Let's stabilize her here before we think about ICU transfer. A nurse adjusted the four-line, and Max caught sight of Emily's tiny hand taped down to keep the needle secure. It was such a small hand. He remembered it wrapped around his finger for the first time just a few days ago, and the memory felt like both a gift and a knife. Sarah looked up at him, her eyes wide, and he saw in the thing he'd been trying not to name. Fear big enough to eat you alive. He moved to the other side of the bed, close enough to touch Emily's ankle under the blanket. "Hey, monkey," he said softly. "You're giving everyone a scare, you know that? That's not very polite." Emily didn't respond, but her lashes fluttered just once. It was enough to keep him upright. Minutes stretched and collapsed in strange ways. Sometimes the room felt like it was moving too fast to follow. Sometimes like nothing was happening at all. A respiratory therapist arrived with oxygen tubing, gently fitting the prongs into Emily's nose. Her chest rose and felt a little easier after that. "BP's coming up," a nurse reported. 90/50. "Keep the fluids going," Winters said. "Let's ride this improvement." Max caught Sarah's hand over Emily's body, their fingers tangling without thought. For a second, they just stood like that, not looking at each other, both holding on to the same small anchor between them. An hour passed. Then another. The fever stayed high, but Emily's blood pressure steadied, and her oxygen levels held. The urgency in the room eased just slightly, like the tide pulling back after almost sweeping you under. "We're past the worst of it for now," Winters said finally. "We'll keep her here, monitor closely, and adjust antibiotics once the cultures come back." This was likely a neutropenic fever, common after starting chemo. Scary, but manageable with quick action. Sarah let out a breath that sounded like it had been waiting in her chest for hours. Max released her hand reluctantly, like letting go of a rope. "Can we talk to her?" he asked. "She may be drowsy for a while," Winters said. "But yes, talk to her. She'll hear you." So they did. They talked about pancakes and rabbits, about how Mr. Ears had been brave too, sitting right there on the bed through the whole thing. They promised her a get-well party in the playroom with more stickers than any other kid had ever collected. At some point, Sarah's voice broke. Max picked up the story without missing a beat, telling Emily how once, when he was a boy, he'd tried to make pancakes without a recipe and nearly set the kitchen on fire. He could have sworn he saw the corners of her mouth twitch. By dawn, the fever had dropped a degree. Emily's breathing was easier, her skin cooler. The nurse adjusted her blanket, dimmed the lights, and slipped out quietly. Max and Sarah stayed. Neither of them had moved far from the bed all night. Sarah was slouched in the chair now, her head tipped back, eyes closed. Max stood by the window, watching the first pale light of morning touch the brick wall outside. He thought about all the nights he'd spent chasing deals across time zones, about the private jets and glass-walled offices, about the silence of penthouses that were never really homes. None of it mattered here. None of it could buy this fragile, priceless inch of improvement in his daughter's condition. He turned back to the bed, to Emily's small, sleeping face, to Sarah's tired one. And for the first time in years, he felt something like clarity. He wasn't going anywhere. The hospital room had learned to breathe again. Machines still hummed and beeped, but at a softer rhythm now, no longer screaming alarms in the dark. Emily was propped up in bed with her rabbit beside her, a juice box balanced on her lap, her eyelids heavy but her spirit stubborn. Sarah was cutting her grapes in halves at the little rolling table when Dr. Winters knocked once and stepped inside. Her expression was calm, but carried the weight Max had come to recognize. The look of someone bringing a truth you didn't want but needed. "We've reviewed Emily's latest labs." Winters began, pulling up a chair. "Her neutrophil count is significantly lower than expected for this point in treatment. This can happen, but the drop is sharp enough that I want to run further tests." We need to determine if it's a chemo-related suppression or if her bone marrow is having trouble on its own. Sarah put down the plastic knife. What would that mean? Winters hesitated. If her marrow isn't recovering between cycles, it could complicate our schedule. We might need to adjust her chemo intensity, which could affect outcomes. There are also rare conditions that can exist alongside leukemia, and I'd like to rule those out. Max leaned forward. So, what's the plan? We'll schedule a bone marrow aspiration for tomorrow morning. It's a short procedure. She'll be sedated. The samples will tell us more. Sarah nodded slowly, her fingers brushing the blanket over Emily's legs. Is it dangerous? There are risks with sedation, but they're minimal here, Winters said. The bigger risk is not knowing what's happening inside her marrow. Emily looked between the adults. Is that like taking a picture? Sort of, Winters said with a gentle smile. But instead of a camera, we use a special straw to take a tiny sip from your bones. It sounds weird, but you'll be asleep and won't feel it. Emily made a face. A bone straw? That's gross. Yeah, Max said, managing a faint smile. But it's superhero stuff. Only the tough ones get it. Winters left them with consent forms and instructions. Sarah read every word. Max signed where needed, his pen heavy in his hand. That afternoon, the wait outside their room began to press in. Margaret appeared in person, dressed not in her sharp suits but in jeans and a sweater, which made her look almost unfamiliar. She handed Max a folder. This is the situation, she said quietly. 2 major contracts are up for renewal in the next month. One of your rivals is courting the clients aggressively, leveraging the rumor mill about your absence. The board's divided. Half want to support your leave. Half think you're jeopardizing shareholder confidence. Sarah, sitting by the window, glanced over. So they're circling because they smell weakness? Margaret nodded. Exactly. And the press got wind of Emily's hospitalization. So far, we've kept the name out of it, but she trailed off. Max closed the folder without looking at it. I'm not leaving. Not for a day. Tell them they can push the renewals through the COO. They'll fight that, Margaret said. Let them. Margaret's eyes softened in a way Max rarely saw. Just know, the more public this gets, the harder it will be to shield her from it. He knew she meant Emily, and the thought landed like a stone in his chest. That night, after Emily fell asleep, Max and Sarah found themselves standing in the hallway outside the vending machines. The air smelled faintly of coffee and bleach. You're still running an empire in your head, Sarah said quietly, almost an accusation. He shook his head. I'm dismantling one in my head, piece by piece. So there's nothing to pull me away. She studied him, as if looking for cracks. You walked away before. What's different now? Max met her eyes without flinching. Back then, I didn't know what I was losing. Now I do. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Emily's voice, faint but clear, drifted from the room. Mom? Dad? They went back in together. Morning brought a nervous kind of quiet. Emily was wheeled down to the procedure suite, clutching Mr. Ears like he was the one about to have bone marrow drawn. Max walked beside the gurney, Sarah on the other side. The sedation went smoothly. Winters emerged 40 minutes later. She did well. We'll have preliminary results within 24 hours. Full panel in 3 days. When they returned to the room, Emily was groggy but smiling, proud of the cartoon bandage on her hip. Do I get a prize? She mumbled. You get pancakes in bed, Sarah said. The day passed in fragments. Emily coloring, napping, asking odd questions about bones and straws. Sarah dozed in the chair. Max stepped into the hall to take a short call from Margaret, who reported more aggressive boardroom chatter. By evening, the sun had dipped below the skyline, the room bathed in dim gold. Emily was asleep again, her chest rising and falling steadily. Sarah was looking at her, but speaking to Max. If this test says it's worse than we thought, she began. Max cut in softly. Then we fight harder. She turned to him. And if fighting harder means putting her through hell? He didn't answer right away. Then we make sure she never does it alone. The knock came just before 8 p.m. Winters stepped in, still in scrubs, her expression careful. She glanced at Emily. Still asleep? Then back at them. We got some of the rapid markers back. She said quietly, I think we need to talk in the conference room. Max felt his stomach drop. Sarah stood, already pale. They followed Winters down the hall, the sound of their footsteps swallowed by the hospital carpet. The conference room was small, windowless, and cold. Winters closed the door and sat. The marrow sample shows signs of something beyond leukemia, she said. We're seeing features consistent with an early aplastic process. Her bone marrow may be failing to produce cells independently. Sarah's breath caught. What does that mean? It means, Winters said gently, that she may need more than chemotherapy. If the trend continues, we'll have to consider a bone marrow transplant. The word transplant hung in the air like a live wire. Max spoke first. So we start donor matching now. Yes, Winters said. I've already ordered HLA typing. You two will be tested as well. We need to move quickly. Sarah closed her eyes briefly, as if bracing against a wave. Max's jaw was set like granite. Winters leaned forward. I need you to understand. The transplant option changes the risk profile. It's more invasive, more dangerous. But in some cases, it's the only path to a cure. When they left the room, the hallway seemed longer than before. They walked back in silence until they reached Emily's door. She was still sleeping peacefully, unaware that the world had shifted again. Max stood in the doorway, watching her. We'll find the match, he said quietly, almost to himself. We have to. The morning after Dr. Winter's revelation, the room felt smaller, as if the air itself had learned the weight of the word transplant. Nurses came and went with quiet efficiency. Sarah sat by Emily's bed, her coffee cooling untouched, while Max stood at the counter by the sink, scrolling through his phone without really seeing it. Winters arrived just after rounds. We'll start with immediate family for HLA typing, she explained, laying out the forms. Max! Sarah, will draw blood from both of you today. If neither of you is a full match, we move to extended relatives, then the National Registry. Sarah nodded. You can test her half-brother too? Absolutely, Winters said. And any cousins, siblings, even half-siblings. The more samples, the better. Max glanced up from the papers. Emily's my only child. Sarah's pen hesitated for half a second before she started writing names. It was the first time Max realized how short her list of family was. One cousin in Seattle and Ann in Florida. Winters was careful, but direct. It's not unusual not to find a match in the family. We prepare for that possibility from day one. When the phlebotomist came to draw blood, Emily watched from her bed, fascinated. Is this part of the hero's search? She asked. Sarah smiled faintly. Something like that. Emily turned to Max. Maybe you'll be my hero. He squeezed her hand. I'm already trying. Heroes don't just try, Emily said matter-of-factly. They win. By late afternoon, the blood samples were sent off, and Max's phone started buzzing again. Margaret's name appeared first. We have a problem, she said without preamble. One of the financial blogs is running a story tonight, not just about your leave, but about Emily. Someone leaked the transplant talk. Max's grip on the phone tightened. Who? I don't know yet, but if it goes live, the speculation will be brutal. You need to decide, deny, no comment, or confirm with your own statement. Max looked across the room at Emily, who was holding Mr. Ears up to the light, pretending to give an eye exam. We protect her. No names, no pictures. I'll handle it, Margaret said, but you should prepare for cameras when you leave the building. That evening, Emily insisted they all play a game from the hospital's toy cart. It was a board game about explorers searching for treasure. Emily appointed herself captain and Max as first mate, leaving Sarah to be the cook who makes the treasure sandwiches. Halfway through, Emily leaned against Max and whispered, If I get a new marrow, does that mean I get someone else's superpowers? Sarah looked over, startled. Max bent close. Maybe, but you've already got more than enough. 2 days later, Winters called him into her office. The blinds were drawn. A folder lay on the desk. We have the results, she said. Max, you're not a match. Sarah, You're a partial, but not close enough for a safe transplant. Sarah's hands tightened in her lap. Max felt the floor tilt under him. What now? He asked. We start the national search, Winters said. Every day counts. I've already submitted Emily's profile. But full matches can be rare, and it can take weeks, even months. Sarah's voice was low. And if we don't find one? Winters hesitated. Then we'll have to make some very difficult choices about alternative donors or modified conditioning regimens. Outside the office, the hospital noise carried on as usual. But for Max, it felt like the clock had started ticking, and every second was already gone. The next morning, Dr. Winters came in with a portable tablet and a fresh stack of forms. We've entered Emily's profile into the National Marrow Registry, she began. From here, it's a process of running her genetic markers against millions of registered donors worldwide. A perfect match gives us the highest chance of success, but even then, there are hurdles: location, health status, willingness to proceed. Sarah listened with her arms folded tightly, as if she could keep the world out by holding herself together. How long does this usually take? Best case, days, Winters said. Worst case, months. And Emily's condition doesn't give us the luxury of waiting too long. Max's jaw tightened. So we make it faster. Winters gave him a look that was part caution, part acknowledgement. There are ways to widen the net. Public appeals, donor drives. But it comes with media exposure. Within hours, Max was on the phone with contacts across industries. Philanthropy directors, CEOs, hospital administrators in Europe and Asia. Anyone who could speed up a search or encourage donors. His name opened doors, but also carried the risk of drawing attention to Emily's case. Margaret called in from the office. If you go public, it will dominate headlines. That could help find a donor faster. But it also invites scrutiny you might not be ready for. I'm ready, Max said. Emily doesn't have time for me to worry about my reputation. Sarah, meanwhile, had her own battle. A reporter was waiting outside the hospital entrance, camera ready. Ms. Mitchell, can you comment on your daughter's health? Is it true she needs a transplant? She pushed past without answering, but the intrusion left her shaken. Inside the elevator, she pressed her back to the wall, closing her eyes until the doors opened. When she returned to the room, Emily was sitting cross-legged on the bed, showing Mr. Ears a picture book. Mommy, Daddy says we're going to find a hero who matches me, she said with a smile that made the word hero sound like magic instead of medicine. Sarah sat beside her. That's right, baby. And we're looking everywhere. By the end of the week, Winters had news. We've found a potential match, she said, holding a printout. 34 years old, registered 5 years ago, lives in Chicago. A full HLA match. Sarah's relief was immediate. Max exhaled for what felt like the first time in days. So we bring him in, he said. There's a process, Winters cautioned. We contact them, confirm their health, willingness, and availability. Most proceed, but some change their minds. As if on cue, her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, her expression shifting. It's the registry coordinator. She stepped out into the hall. Minutes later, she came back, her voice careful. The donor is hesitating. They've asked for more time to consider. The room fell silent. Sarah's hand found Max's without thinking. Emily, unaware of the tension, tilted her head. Did we find the hero? No one answered. Dr. Winters didn't sugarcoat it. The donor's hesitation isn't unusual, she told him the next morning. They're healthy, but they're concerned about the recovery period, missing work, possible complications. Most of the time, reassurance and information help, but occasionally, a donor decides they can't go through with it. Sarah rubbed her temples. Can we talk to them? Explain what this means for Emily. Winters shook her head. Legally, the registry protects donor privacy. All communication goes through the coordinator. But I can let them know you're grateful and how urgent the need is. Max paced the small space between the bed and the window. If I can find out who they are, I can convince them myself. Max, Sarah began, but he cut her off. I'm not sitting here while a stranger decides if my daughter gets to live. That afternoon, While Sarah took Emily to the hospital playroom, Max was on his laptop, pulling favors from contacts who owed him more than money. By nightfall, he had a name, Daniel Carter, age 34, warehouse supervisor in Chicago. No spouse, no children. Margaret's voice was sharp over the phone. If you approach him directly, you could violate registry protocols and jeopardize the match entirely. I don't care about protocols, Max said. I care about Emily. Meanwhile, Emily was asking Sarah if the hero liked chocolate chip cookies. Because if they do, I could give them some after the bone straw thing, she said, deadly serious. Sarah hugged her so tightly Emily squirmed. 2 days later, the registry coordinator called. Mr. Carter is still undecided. He's asked for another week to think about it. A week? Max exploded. She doesn't have a week. I understand, the coordinator said calmly, but we can't force a decision. Pressuring a donor often pushes him away. That night, Max sat alone in the hospital's deserted family lounge, city lights blurring beyond the glass. He had built companies on persuasion, negotiation, closing impossible deals. But this wasn't a deal. This was a man's body, his choice. He was still there when Sarah found him. You can't bully someone into saving her, she said quietly. Max's voice was low, rough. Then what? We just sit here and hope. Yes, Sarah said. We hope, and we make sure she feels safe while we do it. The next morning, Dr. Winters walked in with her phone in hand, her expression unreadable. I just got off the call with the coordinator, she said. Mr. Carter was in a car accident last night. He's in the hospital. Non-life-threatening injuries, but enough that he can't undergo the donation procedure anytime soon. Sarah's breath caught. How long? Months, Winters said. Possibly longer. Max stared at her, the floor tilting under his feet again. The perfect match they had found, gone just like that. Dr. Winters didn't soften the blow. With Mr. Carter unavailable, we have to pivot immediately. We'll keep searching the registry, but we can also consider haploidentical transplants. Using a half match, like Sarah, the risks are higher. More chance of rejection, more complications post-transplant. Sarah's face tightened. How much higher? Statistically, survival rates drop, but with the right conditioning, some patients do well. Max leaned forward. And if we wait for another full match? Winters looked at Emily, who was playing quietly with a puzzle on the bed. Every week we wait, her counts drop. We may not have months. That night, Max sat in the hospital cafeteria with his laptop, making calls across time zones. He reached out to contacts in medical research, private donor databases, even biotech startups working on stem cell innovations. He didn't care if it was unorthodox. If it could save Emily, it was on the table. Sarah found him hours later, coffee in hand. You're trying by a miracle. I'm trying to find one, he said. She slid into the seat across from him. If you gamble on the wrong thing, you could kill her faster. Max's hand stilled on the keyboard. If we do nothing, we lose her anyway. 2 days later, Winters came in with something different in her tone. We may have a lead. The European registry found a 9-10 match in Germany. A woman in her 20s, healthy, willing to be tested immediately. Sarah's heart leapt. 9 out of 10, is that good enough? It's not perfect, Winters admitted. But with proper prep, it could work. Max didn't hesitate. Get her here. Winters hesitated. There are logistics. International donor clearance, travel, retesting in our lab. It could take 3 to 4 weeks. Sarah glanced at Emily, then back at Winters. She might not have 3 weeks. Dr. Winters didn't bother sitting when she came in the next morning. We confirmed the German donor is a strong candidate. But even if she's willing to move quickly, there are legal, medical, and logistical hurdles we can't skip. Testing must be replicated here. Immigration and medical clearance take time. Max's answer was immediate. Then we find a way to skip them. Sarah frowned. Skip? These aren't airline queues, Max. They're safety checks. They're delays, he shot back. Delays we can't afford. Within hours, Max was on calls with his network in Europe, a former ambassador, the CEO of a medical transport company, an old college friend now in the Bundestag. He wasn't asking for favors. He was cashing in debts. By evening, he had 3 potential pathways. Fly a specialist team to Germany to complete pre-tests there. Secure emergency medical visas for the donor and her chaperone. Charter a fully equipped medical jet for immediate transfer once cleared. Sarah listened to the plan, arms crossed. And what if she says no to rushing? What if she's scared? Max hesitated. Then I'll fly there myself. You'd pressure her in person? Sarah's voice was sharp. I'd ask her, Max said, face to face, so she understands what's at stake. Later, Emily woke from a nap and spotted a small globe on the counter, a gift from a nurse. She turned it in her hands. Where's Germany? Sarah pointed, and Emily's eyes widened. That's far. How will my hero get here? Do they have super-fast planes? Max knelt beside her. They will. The next 48 hours blurred. Paperwork flew between hospitals. Embassy calls came at odd hours, and Max slept in bursts of 20 minutes at a time. Sarah stayed close to Emily, reading aloud, painting nails, pretending life wasn't waiting on a stranger an ocean away. Then, just as a glimmer of progress emerged, a late-night call from the embassy confirming the donor's visa was in process. Winters arrived unannounced, her face set. She spiked a fever, Winters said quietly. Blood cultures are pending, but her counts dropped again overnight. If this keeps up, we can't wait 3 weeks. We may not even have 2. The beeping was different this time. Sharper, faster, the kind that made your stomach drop before you even open your eyes. Sarah was the first to move, leaning over Emily's bed. Sweetheart. Emily's face was pale, her skin damp with sweat. Cold, she whispered. Within seconds, 2 nurses were in the room, followed by Dr. Winters. She's febrile, 103.5, Winters said, already issuing orders. Draw blood cultures, start broad-spectrum antibiotics, fluids wide open. Max stepped back against the wall, fists clenched. He'd seen emergencies in boardrooms, in war zones of corporate takeover. But nothing felt like this, watching a child who carried his eyes shiver under hospital blankets. By 3 a.m., the fever was stubborn, hovering at 102 despite the meds. Winters finally pulled Max and Sarah aside. She's neutropenic. She has almost no immune system left. Every hour she stays like this, we risk sepsis. We cannot delay much longer. How long do we have? Max asked. Winters hesitated. Days. A week at most before her condition could make transplant impossible. And the donor? Sarah's voice cracked. They're ready, Winters said, but they're still in Germany. The soonest we can have them here, with clearance and final tests, is 12 days. 12 days is too long, Max said flatly. At dawn, they met in the small consultation room off the ward. Papers, charts, and timelines covered the table. Our choices, Winters said, pointing to first column, are proceed with a half-match transplant using Sarah now. Higher rejection risk, higher chance of graft versus host complications, but immediate. Push with a full match donor and risk Emily deteriorating before they arrive. Max stared at the numbers. Option 1, what's the success rate? 50-50, Winters admitted. Sarah looked at him. Option 2, if she can hold on, 70%. Max's mind worked through probabilities, logistics, contingencies. But this wasn't a merger or acquisition. This was Emily. When Winters left, Sarah turned on him. If we wait and she doesn't make it, I will never forgive you. And if we rush and it kills her, will you forgive yourself? Max shot back. Tears burned in her eyes. I don't care about odds. I care about her breathing tomorrow. Max's voice dropped. I have a way to make sure the donor is here in 3 days. Sarah blinked. 3 days? That's impossible. Not if you have the right connections, he said. But it means bending rules, maybe breaking them. She hesitated. And if we get caught? Then I'll take the fall, Max said. You focus on her. By afternoon, Max was on a call with former NATO logistics officer, arranging for the donor to be flown on a medical evacuation jet, bypassing commercial routes. The embassy paperwork was rushed through diplomatic channels. Sarah stayed by Emily's side, holding her hand, reading her story she barely finished before her voice broke. Emily dozed, waking only to ask, "Is my hero coming?" "Yes," Sarah whispered. "Faster than you think." On the third night, just after midnight, Max's phone buzzed. "She's at the airport," the contact said. "We're wheels up in 20 minutes. Max let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "Text me when you're airborne." He stepped into Emily's room. She was asleep, her small chest rising and falling evenly. Sarah looked up. "They're coming." "They're coming," Max said. For the first time in weeks, Sarah let him hold her hand. At 2:17 a.m., Max's phone rang again. He answered instantly. "We have a situation," the voice on the other end said. "There's a mechanical issue. They had to divert before crossing the Atlantic. The connection crackled. They're grounded in Iceland, and there's no guarantee when they can get back in the air." Max stared at the wall, the weight of the words sinking in. The clock was still ticking, and now they might have lost their only chance. Max stood frozen in the hospital corridor, the sterile light bleaching the world into shades of gray as the words echoed in his ear. "They're grounded in Iceland." The line crackled again, the voice of medical transport coordinator barely audible over what sounded like wind. "There's a mechanical issue with the jet. Weather's deteriorating. Heavy snow moving in. No estimate yet on departure. How bad is the storm?" Max demanded. A pause. "Bad enough that most commercial flights are already canceled. If they can't get a replacement aircraft in the air within the next 12 hours, they may not leave until the system passes." Max's hand gripped the phone so hard his knuckles whitened. 12 hours might as well be 12 years for Emily. Every minute shaved away her chances. He glanced toward the glass panel of Emily's room. She was sleeping fitfully. Sarah perched beside her like a sentinel, one hand resting on their daughter's blanket. He didn't want to walk in with this news, but he also couldn't hide it. Sarah's head lifted when he entered. "They're on the way?" she asked hopefully. Max shook his head. "Not yet. They had to land in Iceland. Storm's coming in." The flicker of hope in her eyes dimmed, replaced by something colder. "How long?" "They don't know." Sarah leaned back in a chair, staring at the floor as if it could offer another answer. "She doesn't have time for don't know." Dr. Winters arrived minutes later, summoned by Max's terse text. She listened without interrupting, then pressed her lips together. "Medically, every day matters. If this drags past 48 hours," she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Max exhaled slowly. "What if we get another aircraft to them?" "Not possible through civilian channels right now," Winters said. "The storm's closing the window. You'd need clearance to fly in those conditions." Max's mind was already racing ahead. "Military clearance?" Winters raised an eyebrow. "Do you have that kind of pull?" "I can try," he said, already pulling his phone from his pocket. Over the next hour, Max tore through his contact list. A retired NATO logistics officer, a defense contractor he'd once invested in, an Icelandic telecom magnate whose expansion Max had bankrolled years ago. Each call layered another thread into a fragile web of possibility. Meanwhile, Sarah stayed with Emily, helping her sip water, telling her a soft story about brave adventurers who crossed oceans to save their friends. Emily listened with half-lidded eyes, a faint smile curving her lips. "They'll make it," she whispered. Sarah smoothed her hair. "Yes, baby, they will." When she looked up, Max was standing in the doorway again. His eyes told her everything. No guarantee, but not giving up. By late afternoon, Max had a plan. A NATO cargo plane is leaving from the UK in 6 hours for a supply drop in Reykjavik, he explained in a low voice to Sarah and Winters. "If we can get the donor on that flight, they'll bypass the storm front. Once they're in Iceland, we transfer them to a smaller medevac jet that can fly under the weather band." Winters frowned. "That's risky. Low-altitude flights in winter storms are no joke." "It's also the only way she gets here in time," Max said. Sarah crossed her arms. "And what about the donor's safety? You're asking a stranger to fly through a storm for us." I'm asking them to save our daughter, Max countered. The silence between them was taut, but Sarah didn't argue further. She knew there were no safe options left. At 8 p.m., Max received confirmation. The donor had agreed. She'd board the military transport in London, land in Reykjavik by midnight. Max's chest loosened for the first time in days. But relief was a dangerous luxury, and it didn't last. At 9:17 p.m., Winters rushed into Emily's room. Her blood pressure's dropping. We need to move her to ICU for monitoring. Sarah was already on her feet, gathering Emily's stuffed rabbit and the blanket she refused to sleep without. Emily stirred as they rolled her bed down the hall, her voice groggy. Am I going on another adventure? Yes, sweetheart, Sarah said, forcing brightness into her tone. The most important one yet. The ICU was colder, quieter. Machines surrounded Emily like a protective circle, their blinking lights casting soft glows on her pale face. Sarah sat at her bedside, clutching her tiny hand, while Max stood by the window, phone pressed to his ear, checking and rechecking the donor's progress. At 11:52 p.m., his contact's voice came through. She's on the ground in Reykjavik, but there's a problem. The medevac jet scheduled to take her the rest of the way is stuck in maintenance. Earliest departure? Unknown. Max closed his eyes. No, find me another plane. There isn't one prepped for medical transport on the island right now. The storm's grounded most light aircraft. Max turned, meeting Sarah's gaze across the room. I'm going to get her myself. Sarah stared. You're not serious. I'll take a charter to Reykjavik. Bring her back on the military route. It cuts hours off waiting for a new medevac. That's insane, Max. It's what's left, he said simply. Winters stepped in, overhearing the tail end. You'd need clearance to even board the donor with you, and if the weather worsens. Max's phone buzzed, interrupting her. It was his NATO contact. We can get you on a supplied chopper, leaving from Boston in 90 minutes. It'll rendezvous with a refueling ship, then hop to Reykjavik. But you'll be flying into the edge of the storm. Max looked at Sarah. She shook her head, fear clear her eyes. If you die out there, she loses both of us. He stepped closer. If I stay, she might lose her only chance. I can't live with that. At 1:12 a.m., Max was strapped into the jump seat of a roaring helicopter, the Atlantic stretching dark and endless beneath them. The cold bit through the heavy jacket they'd given him, but his mind was fixed on a hospital bed hundreds of miles away. Sarah had stayed behind, her last words chasing him into the night. Bring her home, Max. Both of you. Hours later, Reykjavik's lights broke through the swirling snow. The landing was rough, wind buffeting the rotors, but the chopper touched down safely. A tall woman in a thick parka waited at the edge of the tarmac, her breath visible in the frigid air. The donor. Max crossed to her quickly. Thank you for doing this, he said, meaning every word. She smiled faintly. Let's get your little girl her marrow. They boarded a small twin-prop aircraft arranged at the last minute, the pilot promising to thread the needle between storm bands. For the first hour, it was almost smooth. Then the turbulence hit. The plane lurched violently, unsecured supplies rattling. The pilot's voice came over the intercom. We've got icing on the wings. Diverting to Greenland for safety. Max's stomach sank. Greenland was hours from Boston, and every minute counted. He closed his eyes, seeing Emily's pale face under the ICU lights, and knew the storm wasn't their only enemy now. Time was winning. The metal fuselage of the twin prop groaned as the landing gear hit the icy tarmac. Outside, the world was swallowed by a wall of white, snow whipping sideways, the wind howling like it wanted to tear the wings off. Max tightened his grip on the armrest, the vibration rattling up through his bones. Beside him, Anna, the donor, braced her hands against the seat, her jaw set but eyes steady. The pilot's voice crackled through the cabin speaker. We got icing on both wings. No chance of pushing through to Boston tonight. Towers ordering all non-essential flights grounded until the storm front clears. You're stuck here for now. Stuck here. The words hit Max like a body blow. Emily didn't have for now. She had hours. Maybe, The small terminal in Nuke was a mix of harsh fluorescent lights and the smell of diesel fuel. Military personnel moved briskly through the space, their parkas dusted with snow. Max scanned for anyone with rank on their uniform, finally spotting a man in a dark green overcoat with captain's bars. "Captain," Max called, jogging over. "I need your help. My daughter's in Boston. Critical condition. She needs a bone marrow transplant. This woman," he gestured to Anna, "is the match. We have to get to Boston immediately." The captain's expression was polite, but unmoved. "Sir, the weather is not negotiable. We have one C-17 leaving in 40 minutes for Thule Air Base, but it's on a resupply mission, not passenger transport." Max stepped closer. "I'll pay whatever it takes. Fund new equipment. Deliver supplies personally. Whatever you need." The captain's eyes narrowed slightly. "You think this is about money?" Max didn't blink. "I think this is about a child who will die if you say no." For a long moment, the wind outside seemed to fill the silence between them. Finally, the captain exhaled through his nose. "You and the donor get on board, but you follow every instruction. And if anything goes wrong, we divert." "Understood." "Understood," Max said, already signaling to Anna to grab her bag. Back in Boston, Sarah stood in Emily's ICU room, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. The monitors beeped in irregular patterns, each shift making her chest constrict. Dr. Winters was adjusting a line of 4 tubing when she glanced up. "I need you to be prepared," Winters said quietly. "If Max doesn't make it back in time, we may have to use your cells as a half-match. It's riskier, but if she crashes, it's the only chance we'll have." Sarah's throat tightened. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying we can't wait for perfect. We may have to settle for now." Sarah looked at Emily's face, pale, almost translucent under the ICU light, and remembered the day she was born, the way Emily's tiny fingers had curled instinctively around her thumb. The silent vow Sarah had made then, "I will protect you, whatever it takes." She nodded slowly. "If it comes to that, do it." At 2,100 hours, Max and Anna were strapped into the C-17, the cavernous belly of the aircraft echoing with the clank of chains securing cargo. The engines roared to life, a deep, almost primal vibration. Max glanced at Anna, who was staring straight ahead, her hands folded in her lap. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded, just thinking. "My brother died waiting for a match. If I can keep that from happening to your girl..." She trailed off, her voice swallowed by the engine noise. Max swallowed hard. "Thank you. Whatever happens, thank you." The plane lifted into the night, snow swirling past the small porthole windows. For 2 hours, it felt like forward motion was enough, until the pilot's voice came over the intercom again. "Change of plans. Boston's airspace is closed due to the storm path. We're diverting to Goose Bay, Canada. ETA 3 hours. Max closed his eyes, gripping the seat until his knuckles ached. Goose Bay was still over 1,000 miles from Boston. The detour could kill what little time they had left. In the ICU, Emily stirred, her breathing shallow. Sarah leaned close, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "Hey, baby, Daddy's coming back with your hero." Emily's lips curved faintly. "Told you, heroes are real." Winter stepped in, reading the latest labs. "Her counts are dropping faster than expected. We may need to move sooner than we thought." Sarah's voice trembled. "How much sooner?" "Hours," Winter said. "Maybe less." Goose Bay was colder than Greenland, the wind cutting like glass. The C-17's cargo ramp dropped with metallic clang, and Max was moving before the engines powered down. A ground officer intercepted him. "Boston's not accessible tonight. You can wait here or connect through Ottawa in the morning." Max shook his head. "Not acceptable. I need a direct flight." The officer shrugged. "Then you need a miracle." Max didn't hesitate. "Then find me one." 2 frantic phone calls later, Max had arranged for a medical transport jet to meet them on the far side of the base, but it would take 40 minutes to prep, and there was no guarantee Boston would be open when they arrived. As he and Anna climbed into a heated vehicle to wait, his phone buzzed. Sarah's voice was low, urgent. Max, they're prepping the ore. Winters doesn't think she has a night. Max felt the world tilt. I'm almost there. You're not, Sarah said, her voice breaking. And she can't wait forever. The bass loudspeaker announced the readiness of their jet. Max and Anna moved quickly, snow stinging their faces. As they boarded, the pilot turned in his seat. If Boston closes again, we divert to New York. You understand? Max nodded. Just get us as close as you can. Somewhere over the dark Atlantic coast, Max's phone vibrated with a text from Winters. She's critical. If you're not here in 2 hours, we start with Sarah. Max stared at the words, the hum of the engine suddenly deafening. Anna met his gaze. Then we make it in 2. The jet's cabin lights were dimmed to a soft dusk. Outside, the night looked solid. No stars, just a black shape of weather. Max watched the flight map crawl north like a stubborn ant. Every 10 minutes his phone buzzed with updates from Dr. Winters that were really one message wearing different clothes. We're almost out of time. Anna rested with her eyes closed, knuckles white around the armrest each time turbulence jostled the fuselage. The pilot's voice crackled through. Headwinds aren't friendly. Boston is reporting intermittent holds. If the field goes red, we divert to New York. 2 bubbles popped on the screen in rapid succession. Winters, 2 hours to go / no-go. Her pressure is labeled. Sarah, she's waking a lot, keeps asking if heroes get lost. Max typed with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. Tell her heroes take the hard way. We're still on it. The jet pitched. A new message slid onto the screen. Tower, BOS weather hold. Slot revokes in effect. Options, TB, HBN, or PVD. Take Teterboro, Max said before the cockpit asked. I'll handle the rest. He scrolled to Margaret and called. I need a helicopter at Teterboro in 40 minutes. Cleared straight to the Boston hospital roof. I don't care how. Call the governor. The FAA, Santa, whoever picks up. There was the tiniest beat. On it, she said. And Max, bring her home. The jet dropped through clouds and broke into the sodium glow of North Jersey. Wheels kissed asphalt with a grudging squeal. Before the cabin door even opened, Max's phone rang again, an unfamiliar number. This is Coast Guard Sector, southeastern New England. We got a call from someone who owes you. Our MH-60 can meet you halfway if New York can't get clearance into Boston. Refuel in New Haven. You good with a handoff? I'm good with anything that flies. They were on the tarmac in a hurry. A ground crew hustled Anna into a waiting van, Max on its tail. The night air slapped him in the face, cold and grimy with jet fuel. A helicopter squatted at the pad like a patient insect, rotors idling. A state trooper jogged over, communications headset crooked around his neck. Direct to Mass General Roof, he shouted, pointing at the map on his phone. IFR corridor's tight, but Coast Guard will paint you a path from New Haven north. Strap in. Anna swallowed. I'm okay, she said, more to herself than to anyone else. Inside the helo, everything was noise and vibration. The pilot lifted them into a river of air and shot north over a snakeskin of headlights. Below, the Bronx, the dark ribbon of sound, New Rochelle sliding by like a string of beads. Max kept his eyes on his phone, on the second that refused to slow down. Winters, 90 minutes. Prep or in 60. Sarah, she wants pancakes after. Says rabbit, doctors approve. Max smiled without meaning to. Deal stands. He typed. Rabbit surgeons get the first stack. Half an hour of rotothrumb later, they settled into New Haven for a fast refuel. Before the skids kissed the pad, a second bird dipped in from the east. The Coast Guard MH-60, orange and determined. Doors slid open. 2 aircrew hustled them across the tarmac, like luggage with opinions. A thumb went up. Door slammed. The new helo leapt, nose north. Straight shot from Providence. The crew chief yelled over the engine. Weather's ugly over Foxborough, but we've got a clean hole. Max's phone buzzed again. Not text, call. He pressed it to his ear, cupping the mic. Max, Sarah's voice was frayed and steady at once. They have to bring her down to the ore in 30. Winters says if you're not on the roof when she finishes the harvest, we go with me. He looked at Anna. She met his eyes, nodded. 10 minutes early, she mouthed like a vowel. We're coming, Max said. Tell her the hero is wearing orange. The helipad came up out of the dark like a lit coin. Floodlights washed the square in harsh daylight. The skids touched. Doors flew wide. The crew chief's hand chopped. Go, go, go. They hit the roof. A waiting team in scrubs and jackets swarmed Anna into a rolling chair before the blades had fully spun down. A nurse held out 2 badges and a cap for Mac's surgical access. Keep up. Elevator, corridor, blast of warm, sterile air. Everything smelled like betadine and fresh fear. Winters materialized in the flow, mask down around her neck, eyes clear and focused. You made it, she said, and the relief that flickered there nearly undid him. Keep her safe, Max said. It wasn't an order. It was a prayer misfiled as instruction. They split at a set of swinging doors. Anna's gurney went right toward donor harvest. Max went left toward pre-op. Sarah stood in the hallway in paper shoe covers, hair tucked under a blue cap, a mask hanging at her throat. For a second, they just looked at each other. She's asking for you, Sarah said, but they'll be here any second to take her down. He nodded and slipped into the room. Emily looked smaller than he remembered from this morning, dwarfed by warm blankets and the coiled tubing of the port line. When she saw him, her face did the tiniest thing. Relax where it had been brave. Heroes don't get lost, she whispered. They take detours, he said, threading his fingers into hers. But they bring pancakes. Rabbit says 2 syrups, she added, with the gravity of legislation. Rabbit's in charge, he agreed. The anesthesiologist stepped in with practiced kindness. We're ready? She offered Emily a cherry-scented mask. This smells like lollipops. Emily sniffed it and wrinkled her nose. Lies, she murmured, and Sarah laughed a wet, helpless laugh that cut through the room like light. They kissed their daughter's forehead in a choreography no parent wants to master. The bed rolled. The doors swung. The hallway narrowed to a single line of tape on linoleum that only went one direction. Winters was there again. Scrub now. Mask up. Anna's in. We'll harvest marrow and move it straight to processing. If all goes well, you'll see the infusion in, call it 3 hours. 3 hours, Sarah repeated, as if committing to a contract. And then, Max asked. She didn't sugarcoat. Then we wait. Engraftment is a different kind of marathon, but this is the way onto the track. They were shepherded to the family lounge, a room built to be kind to people who've forgotten how to sit. Margaret was there already, improbably in jeans and a sweater again, a paper bag of food no one would taste. She didn't make small talk. She took the 2 phones out of Max's hands, opened them, and put them screen down on the table. They'll find us if they need us, she said simply. Time retreated to the edges of the room. Sarah sat with her elbows on her knees and her hands tented over her mouth, eyes unfixed. Max Pace sat, stood again. Once, he reached for a cup of coffee and forgot to drink it. Once, he sent a single-line email to his COO. Do whatever you must. I'm not leaving this hospital. A nurse appeared like a soft punctuation mark. She's out of harvest. Minimal bleeding. Enough product. We're processing now. Anna, Sarah asked, already in recovery. Sleeping. Brave as hell. Can I? Max began. After, the nurse said gently, 1 miracle at a time. Processing, Winters had explained earlier, was a fancy word for very careful counting and cleaning, identifying the stem cells that would be both weapon and bridge. They expected a red bag, not much to look at. No fireworks. No instant fix. Another hour passed. And then, we're ready. The transplant room felt almost ordinary, which seemed wrong until you understood the point. No scalpels. No drapes. No countdown. Just a pole, a line, and a gravity that had nothing to do with physics. On the pump, a small bag of dark red, the color of any other transfusion, in any other hospital on any other night. A label with Emily's name, her date of birth, a string of numbers that would never mean as much as a hand that held Sarah's now and newborn's trust. Winters stepped forward. This is the part That doesn't look like the movies. No drama. Just life moving from one place to another. She opened the clamp. The first drop slid down the tubing and into the port that sat just under Emily's collarbone like a secret button. It was almost insultingly quiet. Outside the glass, Boston Storm licked the windows. Inside, a handful of cells went hunting for home. They sat with her while it ran. Sarah stroked her hair and told the story about the mouse astronaut again. Max counted the drips until counting felt superstitious and stopped. A nurse changed a bag, and the pumps made two cheerful little beeps as if someone had told him a joke. It finished. The nurse flushed a line. Winters smiled with her eyes. "Happy birthday," she said softly and left them to breathe. The week that followed forgot how to be linear. Days folded in half. Night fell and didn't. Emily slept a lot. When she woke, the room leaned toward her in the small ways that mean everything. Water at the right temperature, light where she wanted it, a stuffed rabbit fresh in the dryer, so it didn't smell like hospital anymore. Fevers came. One spiked high enough to turn the floor to glass. Steroids swelled her cheeks. A rash threatened to become a story they didn't want. Drugs argued it back into the margins. Numbers became gods. Absolute neutrophil count, platelets, creatinine. Nurses celebrated tiny wins like confetti you couldn't see. On day plus 10, nothing happened. On day plus 11, nothing happened louder. On day plus 12, the night nurse woke them just before dawn, eyes shining above her mask. "We have neutrophils," she whispered, like you whisper over a cradle. Sarah covered her face with both hands and laughed a sound that had been barricaded in her chest for months. Max had to sit down because standing up was suddenly advanced work. Counts kept climbing. Slowly. 2 steps forward, 1 sideways, half a step back. But the trend was a slope you could live with. On day plus 21, Winters signed a stack of papers that moved the world from crisis to careful. On day plus 28, Emily walked the hallway clutching the 4-pole like a dance partner, rabbit riding shotgun in the basket. She ate a whole pancake and declared it adequate. Max filed the culinary insult away like a treasure. The first time Anna came by, pale and stitched and smiling, the room adjusted itself to make space for a new kind of gratitude. Emily looked at her for a long time and said very seriously, "Thank you for the bone straws." Anna laughed until she had to hold her side. "Anytime," she said, and meant only once in a way that counts as always. Discharge came in a blizzard of instructions and wipes and masks and schedules. The elevator ride down felt like 2 new parents holding a baby they already knew too well. Boston outside was the late spring kind, raw in the shade, warm if you looked for it. At home, a different home now, one with fewer glass edges and more blankets. Max installed air purifiers and bought fruit he couldn't pronounce. Sarah taped a schedule to the fridge and let herself sit down on the floor one afternoon and cry because sitting on the floor in your own house is one of the privileges of the living. Work called. Work always calls. Max didn't pick up. Margaret texted him photos of a board table without him and numbers that weren't emergencies. "It's fine," she wrote. "We'll bring you problems when they deserve you." He spent afternoons on FaceTime with the CFO explaining that some profits are measured in platelets. He spent mornings at the kitchen table pretending to lose at Go Fish because Emily's grin when she won was a dividend that made more sense than any quarterly. Somewhere between day plus 60 and day plus 100, hair fuzzed back like a promise. The mask could come off in their own living room. The rabbit took up permanent residence on the piano because that's where he could hear the best. On the first warm day of June, they took blankets to the public garden across from the hospital they could see but didn't have to enter. Anna came with a bouquet of peonies in a bakery box she insisted wasn't a big deal and very much was. They ate sandwiches. They didn't talk about blood counts for 10 whole minutes, which felt like breaking a rule and getting away with it. "Story?" Emily asked, settling against Sarah's side in the dappled shade. "Which one?" Sarah said, "The one where the hero got lost but didn't." Emily said, as if there had only ever been one story. Sarah started it and faltered. Max picked it up and got the order wrong on purpose, so Emily could correct him with scandalized delight. When he got to the part with the storm and the orange helicopter, he glanced at Anna, who were pretending not to tear up and failing gracefully. After, while the girls made a daisy chain for the long-suffering rabbit, Max and Sarah sat in the quiet that comes when loud things are finally elsewhere. "I stood in a room once and called a stranger to yell at them about an interview," Max said, almost himself. "I didn't know that the only thing I was qualified to do was learn how to show up." Sarah bumped his shoulder with hers. "You learn fast." "I had good teachers," he said, looking at the child making crowns of flowers and the woman who had been a country all by herself for a long time. "Don't make me cry in a park," she said, already wiping at her eyes. "Too late," he said, and passed her a napkin. They didn't get married that day. There wasn't a ring in his pocket. What there was, a calendar that had dinner penciled in 6 nights a week and a section labeled everything else that kept getting bumped by pancake breakfast and clinic visits, and the kind of laughter that makes neighbors look over a fence and smile. On day plus 180, Winters cleared Emily for life with caution. Emily interpreted that as life, period. She insisted on going back to school part-time. She refused to be special unless it meant choosing the class turtle's new name. It did, or again as show and tell her rabbit, who disrupted learning by being objectively important. On a Sunday evening in late summer, with windows open and the city humming that soft end-of-weekend song, Emily set the table with solemn ceremony. "Pancakes," she announced, "for Rabbit and Max and Mom." Max flipped the first batch in a pan that remembered how badly he had once burned water. He slid one onto a plate for the rabbit, because rules are flexible where gratitude is concerned. Emily poured syrup with the seriousness of a surgeon. They ate. They made a mess. They argued about whether pancakes were better than waffles with the kind of passion reserved for people who can afford to argue about breakfast. When the plates were a sea of crumbs and satisfaction, Emily leaned back in her chair, hands folded behind her head like a tiny executive. "Heroes win," she declared. Max lifted his glass of milk. "To detours," he said. Sarah bumped hers against his. "To finding the hard way home." Emily raised hers last. "To rabbit doctors." They drank, and for a moment the universe, which had been so loud and insistent and sharp, softened into something that made room. Later, when the house was quiet and the dishwasher was speaking its small language in the background, Max stood in the doorway of Emily's room and watched her sleep. Hair on the pillow, rabbit under her arm, breath like the tide. Sarah came up beside him, leaned into his shoulder without asking if she could, as if that question had finally retired. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if the storm didn't break?" she asked. "Every day," he said. "Every night. And then I look at this," he said, tipping his chin toward the bed, "and spend the rest of the day saying thank you in whatever language I can find." She was quiet a long moment. "You know," she said, "I never wanted a savior." "I know," he said. "Me neither." They stood that way until the dishwasher clicked off and the night outside moved on. The city kept its own time. Inside the small circle of their quiet, time behaved itself, just this once. The next morning there would be labs and emails and meetings and laundry. There would be denials and approvals, and a rabbit in need of emergency button reattachment. There would be another story to tell before bed. But for now, the hard way home ended here. 3 hands had learned to find each other in the dark. 3 beating hearts that had been counted by machines and by fear and by love, and a little girl whose marrow was a map written twice, once by a stranger and once by the people who stayed. On the dresser, under the nightlight, a hospital bracelet lay coiled like a shed skin. The house finally felt like it belonged to the living.